Today's episode, I'm really excited to have Joshua Tongol on, who's going to be talking about just his journey out of being a missionary and a pastor and these sort of things, and just kind of his journey since then. I'm really excited. He's just been open and vulnerable on this episode, and I think it's going to be really encouraging to a lot of you guys. Enjoy the show. I'm super excited you're on the show. I just really wanted you to be able to share kind of your experience. For those of you guys that don't know Joshua, he's got a big presence on YouTube, on social media. He has 2 books that he's come out with. And he's also just been on a wild journey of like going from missionary and kind of has been a pastor and has kind of transitioned out of it. And I just wanted to be able to have him share his story with you guys today.
For sure, man. I'm ready. Just let me know. Yeah, let me know where you want me to start.
Yeah, dude. I mean, so what kind of, I don't know if you want to start how you transitioned out or if you want to just start from the beginning of your journey, whichever you prefer, like maybe just kind of like, how did you get involved in like faith type things and then kind of how that led you to where you're at now or whatever.
Okay. Well, I was an atheist most of my life. No, I'm just joking. I wasn't atheist. But no, I grew up in this church stuff, bro. So it's like this was like my life, man. I mean, I grew up in the church. My parents, they raised me up as a evangelical Christian, more of like the charismatic bent. You know what I'm saying? So I was into the whole Holy Ghost, this and that, and I did that most of my life, bro. And so it's like it wasn't until. Well, actually, just to like backtrack and stuff, I was a pastor. I did ministry since I was 17 years old, bro. I mean, I've been part of like several denominations coming from like Assemblies of God, Presbyterian Church, teaching apologetics there. I was an evangelist at another Assemblies of God church and was a pastor at a Southern. I mean, so it's just I was going around, experiencing different denominations, different beliefs, and always very comfortable being, calling myself a Christian.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And so, but it wasn't until, I started asking a lot of questions when I was 17 years old. You know what I'm saying? So I was teaching apologetics, and, I don't know how familiar your audience is with
That's
apologetics.
That's like where you're like arguing for the faith, sort of like the proof.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, defending the Christian faith, giving philosophical arguments.
So you were like you were all in as all in can be.
Oh, for sure, dude. Like you could even hear like my old. I mean, I've been on YouTube for a long time, bro. So it's like
you were an early adopter.
My old stuff. Yeah, it's all out there, So like my whole journey is there. So you'll see this huge shift from a hardcore, dogmatic Christian stuff, and then you'll see me slowly changing and getting a little bit more like skeptical and questioning things. And, you could find my old stuff where I'm even doing apologetics, because majority of my ministry back in the day was defending the faith. Like everyone knew me that way when I was in seminary and Bible school, all that stuff. Like I was the guy that did the apologetics. I would go on apologetic radio shows. My friends are the founders of Apologetic Ministry.
Yeah.
I saw myself as getting a PhD and traveling to be like a Filipino version of Ravi Zacharias kind of thing. You know what I'm saying? Like I literally
totally
saw
know
myself.
who that is, yeah.
And so I was that type that just, because that, to be honest, at that time when I was 17, that changed my life. It was apologetics, because I wasn't, when it came to Christianity, I was a very simple kid. I just grew up reading the Bible and stuff, but I didn't really question things until someone introduced apologetics to me. So that really like gave me a different shift. Like, oh man, I guess Christianity is true. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so I would like go around at churches and primarily just, I wouldn't preach, but I would always do Q&As. So I even have the audios of all those things. They're not on YouTube, but I would do all that stuff. I'd be, studying these different religions and cults. And then, but there's one thing, there's something that I started to realize, like in retrospect, after all this stuff has passed, and I could finally acknowledge now, is that the whole time when I was sharing my faith, defending my faith, I was already assuming that Christianity is true.
Yeah.
Which is a huge assumption. So I'd poke holes here and there. I'd find flaws in all these different religions and worldviews, but I didn't apply the same standards to my own faith. So for example, I'd be like finding contradictions in the Bible, at least things that appear to be contradictions to me, and then I'd notice like a lot of the horrible and the violent things done by God and His people in both the Old and the New Testament, and then I would just be I'd have to question, like, what the hell is that, man? That's crazy. God would do this,
Yes.
command that, and but then I would just plead mystery,
Yeah.
because I'd already assumed that the Bible is without error, that it's scripture is God breathed, yada yada yada. God is good all the time, so He can't do any wrong. So
Yeah.
even if it appears wrong to me, my default answer is, God's ways are higher than our ways. His thoughts are above our thoughts. And so, who was I to question God's word? Like I said, it's an assumption that I've carried with me most of my life, And
Yeah.
so, I get it. You don't have to be an inerrantist to be a Christian, someone who believes that the Bible is true and everything that it affirms. But I was an inerrantist most of my life, because that's just what I was taught.
Yeah.
That's what I inherited. My school taught that the Bible is true and here's how you defend it, philosophically, historically, etc. So, you know, the transition started to happen like big time because I've always was the type to question things in my adult life, but it wasn't until I graduated from seminary and I became a full-time missionary to the Philippines where I'm at now.
Yeah.
This was back in 2009. And so I went full on, missionary, this is the way I made my living financially and, had rough times, just trusting in God for finances and speaking at different churches. But, the thing is when I moved here, that's when I really started to question things. So back then I would question things because I wanted to, critique other religions to show that Christianity is true and superior, to those other religions. But this time around, I started to really question, like even the so-called fundamentals, that a lot of evangelicals Christians hold to, and these are a lot of the things that I inherited. And I was like, what if these things are wrong? And for years, bro, I'll be honest with you,
That's not a question you're like allowed to ask yourself in your psyche when you're a missionary or a minister or something like that. Is it's like you have to be assumed like, oh, this is the right stuff. I just need to figure out the right interpretation of it. Not like, is this right at all?
Right.
That's like so. That's such a huge like leap. Like you don't realize it in your mind, but like especially when it's like your job and it's what's kind of paying the bills.
Oh, it was definitely paying the bills. That's what I was leaning on most. I mean, I went full. I did this full time. I was even tempted to take on like a quote unquote secular job here because of some challenges that we were having. But I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to stick to preaching the Bible and blah, blah, blah. God's going to take care of us.
Yes.
We have some good stories here and there of money coming at the perfect time and stuff. And but just to show that I was in this fully.
Yeah.
And just like you said, it's like it's something that you just can't question in a way because it is your the way you make your living and stuff. But of course, as humans, we do question these things in our mind, but we just kind of like suppress it and just slip it under the rug because you're like, I can't go there. You know? And I remember the times, bro, where I'd be really questioning the Bible at times. And this is like a long time ago. And I'm like, man, if I question inerrancy, that changes everything, like literally. And so I just didn't go down that road. And I would still be reading atheism books like back in the day. I've grown up, not grown up, but like most of my adult years, I've been reading books on atheism, agnosticism, all that stuff since I was 17. But I've always like had the presupposition like, well, Christianity is true. So no matter how much this atheism book makes sense at some point, it must be wrong though in some way. I'm gonna find a hole in it somehow, And so for a time, like just the more that I live my life as honestly as possible, bro. Just to be straight up with you, it just reached a point where Christianity just started not to make sense to me anymore, And so I dissect and like deconstruct certain doctrines, and then there was this domino effect, of just like one doctrine leading to another, and it wasn't like I was trying to not believe anymore because it was tough, But it's just that I reached a point where I didn't see the need to hold on to many of these like complicated doctrines and atonement theories that everybody debates about. It they just seem unnecessary in my life and even irrelevant.
When you kind of tune out from it for even the smallest amount of time, because it's like every with church and these things, you like every week you're like plugging back in to kind of get like your brain washed or your mind renewed or to get kind of filled up with all the stuff. And so like when you like take a break from that stuff, like for the first time, like, and aren't just like constantly filling your mind with it, you're kind of like, like Man,
Mm.
I don't really know that like theorizing about this makes like a ton of sense, or like you start making friends with people that aren't into it and you're like, oh, like how does this relate to their life? Like how does, this penal substitution theory about such and such, like how does that relate to this random person I'm working with's life, or
Exactly, exactly. I mean, that's one of the benefits that I had, when I moved to the Philippines, because prior to that I was in church stinking all the time when I was in
Yeah.
America. I was there like several times a week because I was preaching, I was teaching, I was a pastor, etc. But when I came to the Philippines, I had a lot of time on my hands because I just started from scratch, so
Yeah.
I had a lot of time to myself to just like study more. And I didn't have homework because I was at a Bible school, so I could study the stuff that I really want to study. And the first couple of years in the Philippines, all the majority of the places that I went to all the time, because I had to make new friends, was churches and bars. That's just what I went to like the first couple of years, because that's just the people that I was surrounding myself with, just getting to know people. Because I really came here, bro, with like not really knowing anybody. It
Yeah.
was like my quote unquote step of faith, to try
So you
to
were just
just
going to the Philippines, you didn't know anybody, you were just kind of believing God was going to send you and change the country and whatever.
Yeah, pretty much. Like I literally knew like a handful of people, like barely knew them. I like they were like a connection that I had, but I didn't really know them too well, So they were the ones that helped me like find a home, like the first week that I was there. But
Wow.
I didn't know these people really like on a deep level, So they were just the ones that I thought like, oh, when I go to the Philippines, they could help me find a place maybe. But
Yeah.
I was really on my own, bro. Which is why I got pretty stinking lonely at times,
Yeah.
and so like for me, when I started to realize that some of these ideas in Christianity just kind of I just didn't really seem relevant to me in some ways. I just didn't think about a lot of that stuff anymore to make sense of my life, or the world, and I just kept moving on, and I just felt like I was more in touch with reality, without the Christianese, and just living my life and living with people with different views, and just seeing things from the outside, like what you were saying. It's like you just see things from a different perspective when you step out.
Yeah.
You're like seeing it from the outside in.
And too, like I think one of the fears when you're like inside, you feel like you're safe inside, and then
Yeah,
like, oh, I can't imagine what life would be like outside. And then
sure.
when you go outside and you're like, oh wow, it's like nice out here. Everything is like, like even just some of the things that I hold dear, like spirituality and like that sense of, I don't know, just that sense of like spirituality or whatever.
Yeah.
Like even just realizing like, but before I was like, oh, okay, only Christians have this sense of spirituality. That's what
Mm.
makes us different from every other human on the planet. And then
Yeah.
I moved to a new city, started a new job. I started making friends with it. Were like practicing Islam, and
Mm.
like my one friend in particular has such a super deep faith and is like very spiritual and like very connected, and like the way he would talk about God was so similar to the way I would talk about God. And I was like, whoa, like I didn't even know that was like permissible. I didn't even know that was allowed. Like,
Right, right.
like it's
For
so,
sure.
so eye opening.
No, no, for sure. I mean, like there's a story that I shared a lot back in the day where I used to go around every single week. It was also part of the homework assignment because I took a class on Islam where I had to go to a mosque every single week to dialogue and debate with Muslims. So that was literally my homework. And it's something that I actually loved to do back in the
Yeah.
day, believe it or not. So, because I was a debater type. And so every single week, dude, we'd be going to mosques, meeting with like a panel full of like different scholars and stuff. Like they actually, at least they're self-identified. They'll call themselves scholars. They said they're like, here's our scholars. And then we would just go at it, with me and my
Yeah.
team for my class. And so we were doing that like every single week. And it seemed impressive that we thought, oh, wow, Christianity has the upper hand, with all these arguments and all these things. But there was this one time we went to this one mosque, and then this guy just like really opens up to me, just very genuine. And he's like, I was addicted to drugs before, and then just Allah just changed my life, and he was
Yeah.
sharing his story. And then I'm like listening to this guy. I'm like, dude, it sounds like those Christian testimonies of how God changes
Yeah.
people's lives through Jesus Christ. And so, like, what do you do with that? Right.
Yeah.
And so, like, with my assumptions back then is like, if I want to be committed to my truth, I would be like, well, that's not real, or I'd say, well, he thinks it's Allah, but it's really Jesus. It's like we always try to reinterpret things to make it fit our paradigm or our grid, And so I just reached a point where, I just became more open to hear, the other views that people would hold on to, And it's not that I'm a relativist where like, oh, everything's true, it's just I'm open to hear other people's perspectives now, because a lot of the claims that I used to make and a lot of the claims that I hear among the different versions of Christianity, they don't hold water for me these days, and a lot of people are still trying to convert me to this day, where they watch my videos and think, if Josh only knew that it's not all about like evangelical Christianity, but I could become like Eastern Orthodox, or I could be I could be a universalist, or et cetera, or inclusion, or all these other things. And the funny thing is, people, if they've watched my videos closely, I've studied all that stuff.
Yeah.
Like people accuse me of being a universalist, even though I've never identified myself as that. So people think that I've never been exposed to those versions of Christianity, and I
so
have.
like as though you're only rejecting like the bad fundamentalist version, but it's
Yeah.
like you go on this journey where you start kind of just I don't even know, like figuring out, like for me, it was like, oh man, like I started having more and more compassion for people. So I needed to figure out a way to fit more and more people into my view of religion. And so then you get a more compassionate version of Christianity, and then a more and more compassionate version, until eventually like I would read the Bible and read stuff in it. And I was like, okay, I realize like the version of God that I have now enjoyed for a while, like doesn't really fit like what I'm reading in the Bible anymore. Cause you like, you think like you've found the, like, oh, this is what like the Christians should have believed all along or whatever.
And like I've discovered the right version finally.
And then you read the Bible and you're like, ooh, like I don't really know that like these guys were as compassionate as I'm claiming this was supposed to be.
Exactly.
And that's like a scary feeling.
Yeah, if we're honest with ourselves, we're very selective, right? So it's like a lot of us who were more fundamentalists back then, we'll find the angry versions of God in there. And then you become more the universalist view. You'll find that version of the unconditional love of God, loving all mankind, et cetera, et cetera. And so the Bible is not as like uniform as a lot of people want to make it out to be. It's a bunch of stories and perspectives that people had, and I'm willing to accept that now. But back then I had to make it be like all consistent with one another. This doesn't make sense in the Old Testament. Well, let me interpret it in light of the New Testament. There's all these gymnastics that people want to make of it. And I just feel like, well, we don't even do that with other books.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's like, especially this is a book. We speak as a Bible as if it's just like one single author. Of course, Christians assume it is like God's the author, but in reality, it's a bunch of different authors, and we're trying to make this one author interpret this other author that's like, they've lived so far apart from each other, in
and
years.
Then now, like 2,000 years later, trying to piece it all together and be like, okay, hey, like I've got it figured out. Like,
exactly.
I would always feel so funny, like traveling and speaking at places, and like I thought back on it recently, and I was like, oh my gosh, I would go around places to churches and being like, look, I've got something for you because I've somehow figured out the gospel of Jesus more than gospel. like your pastor and all these other people in your town. Somehow I've got like the secret or something, and I was just it's just so, sometimes it seems like arrogant, other times it just is like just well-intentioned or whatever, but it's just so funny. Like, oh, finally we've unlocked.
Yeah, we've got it now. And I get it, right? Because I mean, you're there, I was there. Of just like we found a message as we continued to grow. We just started to accept more people, into this message, right? It's like we became more inclusive, and so when my theological shift started to happen, and I started to highlight verses that started to speak more about the love of God and grace and all those things, it's like it is a beautiful message, right? When you think about it. And that's one of the things where I tell people, like, I have no regrets, like when I had those other versions of grace back in the day that still taught penal substitution, I was like, I don't hold to that stuff now, but I remember at that time, that's what I believed in. It helped me at that time.
Yeah.
Like when I would emphasize a gospel that was more about forgiveness and grace covering sin and et cetera, et cetera. I don't even talk like that anymore, bro, you know?
Yeah.
But I mean, at that time, that's just what changed me,
Yeah,
you know? And then
and it meets you kind of like it meets you in that language. So it's like if you're used to a
right.
certain language that's like, oh, I'm a sinner, and then you hear
Yeah.
language that's like, oh, well, that's been taken care of. You know, it's like a relief. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
every step of the journey comes as like a relief. You know, and then you just end up teaching on that step or whatever.
Right, right. And then you start to realize, at least for myself, I started to realize that a lot of the truths that I hold dearly that just seem to never change, especially when it comes to like love and all that stuff. I realized I don't need these theological doctrines and like these like the mechanics of it all. Like, oh yeah, the only reason you can forgive is because Jesus forgave. You know, it's like,
Yeah,
you know, do you really need to go there? You know, so it's like all these things that I've seen of the shifts of Christianity and people trying to make sense of it all. I feel like they're just creating like a technology of like, this is the only reason why you're able to love now, you know, because this, or,
yeah,
you know, someone was punished for you. You know, I'm thinking, well, maybe what if that's not really necessary,
yeah,
right? And just what if, you know, so not to say
and
it's wrong,
and
but who knows?
and not even the like, what if it's not necessary, but the thing is it's like mostly kind of shared as like not only is it necessary, but you believing the right way about it is necessary. And like
Yeah.
one of the first times I ran into that was like I was in India and I was doing like a mission trip, and you know we have interpreters and stuff, and I was thinking like, okay, if like any of this has to do with these people like by chance understanding all of the complex theological stuff, like I'm trying
Right,
to
right.
like say in this village that A is like speaking a different language, and now I'm trying to bring like all of this like language about a guy
Yeah.
they don't know of and like all this
Yeah.
stuff, and I was like, man, like it's got to be simpler than this.
Yeah. Exactly. You know, and so for me, it was more of just kind of removing the complicated doctrines out of my life that if it works for somebody else, it's all good. But for me, like I said, it just reached a point where it just kind of fell off of me, where I'm like, I just don't think about that stuff
Yeah.
on a
And
daily
And
basis.
when you were and when those like kind of technologies and systems kind of fall off, you know, as far as like the need for like thinking about theology all day, like obviously
Mhm.
you went from, you know, being a apologet like an apologist and a missionary. So
Mhm.
like those are the thoughts that are consuming you all day long.
Yeah.
What when you transitioned out of thinking about those things all day long, was it like hard at first, or was it a relief or a mix of both, or
Yeah, it was probably a mix of both because it's like for me, I think about these things a lot. You know, so even when like I even went through a period when I was in the States because we lived in the States for 3 years, like
yeah.
after we got married. So it's funny, but like when I would go on YouTube, people started complaining that I don't talk about Jesus anymore. I don't quote the Bible because I started doing a lot of motivational stuff. I kind of
Yeah.
wanted to just make a shift in my YouTube channel and stuff. And but believe it or not, like even though I'm making all these videos about like motivation and inspiration every single day, and my wife can vouch for this, I would be like researching, podcasting, reading books about the history of Christianity, like because that's still in me,
Yeah.
you know, because that's always been in my mind. So, and that's another reason why I don't want to talk about those things publicly because I'm just like researching these things all
Yeah,
over
you're on like
again,
a
which is
quest for truth.
exactly, you know, because I've researched those things back in the day. I've read early church fathers, even when I was in seminary, bro. But like I said, it was always a perspective with the assumption that my Christianity is already true, you know. So I started rereading atheist books, agnostic, all that stuff. New age, you know, the stuff that's really out of the box, studying more about near death experience, just different things to give me a different perspective or to challenge my perspective. So now I'm able to say, I really want to learn. I really want to know. And the more that I started to kind of think outside of the box, it wasn't as uncomfortable to hear views that are kind of out there. But back then, even back in the day, like I remember someone talking about universalism like long time ago made me a little uncomfortable, you know, but the more you kind of like shift and change your views and you expose yourself to other things with an open mind and open heart, it doesn't really, at least it didn't bother me. And that's why I'm a very open person in that sense. You know what I'm saying? But I still have my mind. Like I said, it doesn't mean that, well, Josh believes whatever someone tells him or, you know, of course not. It's like
Yeah.
I'm open, but I still analyze things. Someone was asking me, what should they do now? If what yesterday or this morning they were just talking about like they're leaning towards atheism and all that stuff, and
Yeah.
and I shared to them my views. but a lot of people make a lot of assumptions about it. Now that Josh is not like this, he's like this.
Yeah.
If you watch my YouTube videos, you'll notice I don't really talk about what I believe. I just share stories
Yeah.
and say on how I feel during this deconstructing phases.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of assumptions being made about me where people even tell me that they're on like Facebook groups where they're debating whether or not I'm an atheist and stuff like, which is interesting. So like I identify with a lot of atheists. So
yeah, that's really great that there's just people that have time in the day to just be like, oh, I think I'm gonna go online and figure out like discuss among other people what Joshua believes. That's so funny.
Right. Well, more power to them. I don't know.
Exactly. The thing, I don't know about like you. I was just wondering, like, when you kind of leave that system, as far as like going to church all the time or being like in kind of accepted in the faith community or whatever, is like, I've noticed, like, for me at least, like, sometimes I miss, like, certain things I don't miss at all. I'm like, oh my God, I'm so glad I'm like not in that anymore. But then other things I'll miss, like sometimes I'll just be like, oh man, I really miss like being able to like, I don't know, like sometimes I'll really miss like prayer meetings, or I'll miss kind of that feeling of community that you kind of have when you're just showing up with the same people every week or whatever.
Yeah.
For sure. Like when you move out of kind of a more dogmatic idea, because it's honestly, you almost feel like you're not accepted into these sort of things when you're not dogmatic, or you just decide you don't really want to go anymore. Where do you like, how have you felt like kind of leaving these sort of things? Do you miss it at all? Do you have plans for kind of new types of spiritual communities or?
Yeah. Oh, well, it's changed throughout the years, bro, because I've been out of the institutional church since 2009.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't realize that, So I've been out for a couple of years, and so I've had different experiences in different communities of, even experiencing house church and organic church and all those types of things.
Yeah.
And those played a role at some point, but they just don't work for me nowadays because I just don't care too much for the type of service. But like you, I did have those moments of missing community, not so much like, let's have a service and let's pray. Like with prayer meetings, bro, I was the exact opposite. Those are like the least thing that I would look forward to. I just wasn't into prayer meetings like my whole life, but I did miss just being around my friends, just chatting, eating out together. And of course, we've had that throughout the years, but I think that's where the institutional church is good at those things of like bringing people together. But of course, when it comes to sometimes the programs, I'm not interested in those. But just the fact that you could have events or you could have discussions that's already set up, especially, when I moved to the Philippines, it's like a lot of people that I was surrounded with, they didn't really initiate. I was the guy that always initiated. Like, let's hang out here, let's go there, and then if I don't say anything, no one meets up. That's the circle of people that I was around with. So. I've had those moments where I'm like, oh, I miss that, or I even miss preaching, to be honest, because I've been a preacher for so many years, and people would always give me a platform to speak, and I felt like that was the
outlet of like, that's honestly why I started podcasting, because I was like, oh man, I want to have an outlet to share and talk and discuss without having to like worry about the offering at the end and the weird pastor politics or whatever.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So just like you, bro, like that's why I would capitalize on my YouTube channel.
Yeah.
So at the times when the churches were being warned about me, especially here in the Philippines. I remember I told my wife, I'm like, all right, rumors are being spread about me here. People are receiving text messages about me that I'm a cult leader. Like, it was pretty bad, bro. Like, It was so bad. I wanted to leave America, to go to America after my first year.
Yeah.
It was really that bad. Like, people would just come up to me and say, Josh, I heard about you. We were warned about you, blah, blah, blah. And I felt kind of lonely because I didn't have like a church at that time. I had a small group of friends who weren't really ministers. So like being new to a country, like I'm the type I could take criticism because I've received that for so many years with my older teachings on healing and stuff. But I felt like I wanted more backup.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Because I was just like this new guy in a new country who had a small group of friends, and I'm hearing a lot of negative things about me.
Yeah,
it made me feel kind of like out of place. Like, I don't know if this is my home anymore. I started to miss my family, and so that's just where it got tough at times, and I just needed more people in my life, and so thankfully over time we did have that community where we did meet up, not even on a weekly basis, but we started having a community like where I would see people almost every day.
Oh,
And that's
wow.
something that I didn't even experience even in America because we're so busy with school and work and
Yeah.
everyone lives far from each other in America. But here in the Philippines, bro, like our first couple of years here was like stinking crazy. Like we would see each other like literally every day. Like they would
Wow.
make, and that's where I saw the message of love like really transform people's lives. Like we would be chilling till like 3 or 4 in the morning, and these people have work like at 6 in the morning. And they would just tell me saying, Josh, it's just we've never heard this message, this kind of message before. So this country is predominantly Roman Catholic.
Hmm.
So it's very much like ingrained of like religious, practices and sometimes, fear of hell and so like that. So
Yeah.
when I would share this message, it did attract a good number of people that really stuck by my side and defended me when they would hear people talk bad about me. And so that really changed my life. But just seeing that kind of community, of course, it kind of died down a little bit for the past couple of years because some of them, they have kids, they got married, they live further away. So we
Yep.
meet up like every so often, but not so much. But it's possible, and like just like you and me, like doing podcasts and stuff. Like I knew that if I have this heart to share and speak about stuff, I don't need a church to ask me anymore, dude. And
Yeah.
I'll just do it myself. I don't want to live as a missionary trying to preach the right thing so I could continue to receive financial support because that's why we started to lose money because I spoke my mind so much on YouTube
Yeah.
where people would stop supporting us and even ask for their money back. And I'm just like, whoa, okay. I told Remy, I'm like, are we ready for my wife, Remy, I
Yeah.
was like, are we ready for this? And so we both agreed. We're not going to compromise, and we're just going to keep speaking our heart to share, let people know our journey. And so we just decided to leave a lot of that stuff altogether.
Yeah.
And of course, I would speak like as a guest speaker at some places, as like to those communities that were open. But for the most part, I would just do my own thing.
Yeah.
And just set up meetings with people that I knew and just like, hey, let's meet up at Starbucks. Let's meet up at Krispy Kreme or something. And we would have like these big ass gatherings at these coffee shops. It's crazy.
That's awesome.
So it was like, it was fun,
Yeah.
so.
And like going from like I think was it a big transition to go from like okay, like I'm going to be a missionary or an apologist, that's going to be like what I do for the rest of my life to being like okay, now I don't know that like I'm going to do that anymore. Like
Yeah.
because when you transitioned out of being a missionary, like how old were you and like did you think like okay, now what or what?
Yeah. I was in my early 30s, so I'm turning 36 next month, but I
Okay.
still look like I'm 16. No, I don't. Maybe in my 20s now. But yeah, it was in my early 30s, and it does, like, I don't have any regrets, bro. That's something that
Yeah.
I could say for sure. Was it easy? Sometimes it felt like it was, sometimes it wasn't. So just to be honest with you,
Yeah.
because it was my whole life. Like I said, I was raised in this stuff, and I went to school that was stinking expensive, almost cost me like 100 grand,
Yeah.
to study
For
to
like
be
Bible school.
for Bible school. I got my
Whoa.
master's degree. I emphasized in systematic theology. I wanted to be like a scholar.
Yeah.
I wanted to be the guy that studies all these heavy theological stuff and makes it simple on YouTube for my audience.
Yeah.
I wanted to be that guy, and like I said, I had a heart to just share the quote unquote good news. And so it was my life in that sense. And like I said, I left everything. I left the
Yeah.
States, my family. I came to this new country with no car, nothing, I didn't have a lot of money. So I was all in, and so for
Yeah.
me to have a shift, of course, it caught me by surprise, and it caught a lot of people by
Yeah.
surprise. I even ran into some guy, on Christmas, literally on Christmas Eve, I was going to a gathering, and some guy on the MRT, it's like this, like a subway station here in the
Yeah.
Philippines. He recognized me on the MRT. He's like, "Oh, Josh Tomlin!" We started chatting on the MRT like the whole trip, and even when we got to our destination, we're still chatting. He's like, "Josh, I heard you speak like years ago, man, and I remember, dude, like all of us were listening to you. We're like, dude, I love this message, man." But then now, Josh, your recent stuff. A lot of my friends who used to like you, they're like, dude, I don't know about that Josh guy anymore, and they're all scared about where you're going. But I like the stuff that you're saying, and so like I said, we've surprised a lot of people.
Yeah.
Because here I am, this guy who could quote the Bible a lot. I memorized this stuff like so much on a daily teaching, and here I am. I'm like, honestly, bro, I surprised myself on how I don't think about those things
Yeah.
in a way anymore.
No,
And that's where I
and
don't know.
it is very strange too, because like I've been in kind of the same place of like where it's like now I just don't really even think about it. Like I just think about other things like fill my
Yeah.
mind. And you like I don't know, for me, like I when I was in all of that stuff and that was filling my mind all day long, theology and Bible, and I would
Uh,
have thought like, oh my gosh, I can't imagine life without these things filling my mind. And then it
yeah.
just slowly like faded away from being at the forefront of my mind. Like I didn't make like a conscious decision of like, okay, I'm cutting this out or something. It
Yeah,
literally
yeah.
just started like fading away almost. And it was such a weird feeling though too, because like when you've been a speaker and an author and you've changed people's lives and they felt like you were a key to their life getting better because of something you said, then
Yeah.
you like it's really funny when those people come to you and they're like, hey man, like such and such thing you said was like so empowering, and you're like, oh man, like that's interesting, like that's doesn't seem that empowering to me
Right.
anymore, or
Right.
like
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, that's what happens, man. And I think like what a lot of people get concerned about is that now that I've left or I don't identify myself as a Christian anymore, they'll think, so what do you believe now? Like
yeah.
how do you live your life? How do you decipher what's right and wrong, et cetera, et
Yeah,
cetera?
like
And
are you
so,
even a moral person anymore? Are
yeah,
you just like
exactly.
boozing and doing drugs
Just
now?
robbing banks, you know what I'm
Robbing
saying?
banks and going to the
And
strip
so,
club.
that's why, no, I'm just that's the thing, bro. It's like what I'm trying to do in my videos, and I'm doing it slowly in a way, is that I'm showing people the process of my quote unquote deconversion
Yeah.
of where, okay, I let go of a lot of these beliefs because a lot of people, I don't want to say everybody, but I think a lot of people, we do question, what's our origin? Where do we come from? And then we ask the question about meaning. How do we have meaning in our lives, or
Mm.
morality? How are we supposed to live? And then the whole idea of destiny. Where do we go when we die? And what people don't, a lot of people don't realize, at least the ones that I talk to, is that they don't see a lot of those questions being answered sufficiently outside of their Christian worldview.
Yeah.
And I get that because for myself, studying apologetics and teaching it, I felt like we had the upper hand as Christians because we were able to answer those fundamental questions of meaning and morality and origin and destiny, et cetera. So I felt like we had that consistency to talk about the big things in life.
Hmm.
And for me, yeah, I could see Christianity and a lot of the ones that guys I would listen to back in the day, they did have answers for all of those things. But I started to realize that I don't buy into the answers anymore.
Yeah.
And so that's the problem. I don't buy into it. So there are answers, but that doesn't mean that they're good answers.
Yeah.
And so I'm very much interested in studying things about life after death and even introspect and learning about like how are we supposed to live if you don't have a framework of getting your morality from the scriptures, and it's very subjective when you even really think about it, because everybody has their own version of Christianity anyways, where they're very selective of certain verses of the Bible that they want to choose to live by.
Yeah,
You know what I'm
exactly. I mean,
saying?
that's how
So
come like the same Bible can inspire like some of the most loving people, or like the
complete opposite.
Crusaders in like Westboro
Exactly.
Baptist or whatever, and
Yeah,
it's like
you
they're
pick
all
and
pulling
choose.
from the same like script.
Yeah, you pick and choose, and that's where a lot of and that's where I moved out of the whole inerrancy thing, because people would say, "Oh, Josh, there's so many people just misinterpreting the Word of God," and my saying is, no, the Word of God might be wrong too, because people judge me as since I talk about my experiences a lot.
Yeah.
And for me, I think stories are powerful, which is why I share them. I'm not the type of guy who likes quoting Bible verses a lot. Even in my book, I think I only probably mention like one or two Bible verses,
Yeah.
because I do think that logic and stories, life experiences are very persuasive to people. And so when people judge me and say, Josh, you're all about your experiences instead of basing it upon the Word of God, I tell those people, well, you're judging it based upon the experiences of those people who wrote the Bible.
Yeah.
So it's like it has to stop somewhere. So it's not all about this is just the Bible says it. You're believing stuff from people from back in the day who had their own experiences, and they put it into a book, or people eventually made it into the
Compiled it
Bible.
all. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's still another person's experiences. And so, I'm doing like writing stuff on hell, because I'm going to be contributing to a book. And but just thinking about like the whole idea of the afterlife. You have these people who talk about at the pulpit, even these young pastors, you know what I'm saying, where they talk about exactly what's going to happen in heaven and in hell because the Bible says, or your
Yeah.
grandma or grandpa, they don't know Christ, so they're going to be in hell forever because the Bible says. And so here's these people speaking about stuff that they've never experienced before. I would say, did you go to hell? Did you go to hell? Now, if they had a near death experience, granted, we can talk about that. We can dialogue about that. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? But then again, there are other people who just like to just quote a Bible verse and they think that they're experts on it because they know the Greek and the Hebrew. You know what I'm saying? So experience for me is crazy important. Experience is what changed my life every single time,
Yeah,
these
every
days, even
step of
when
the
I was a
way.
Christian. Yeah, it's like, who doesn't have an experience? And our experiences are, in a sense, the grid of how we interpret the Bible in some ways. You see what you want to see. You
Yeah.
know what I'm saying?
No, for sure. And what do you like? What would you say to people that feel like they're also on a journey, or like, I mean, obviously, like, I feel like every single human being is on some sort of journey.
Yeah.
And like, what would your advice be to, let's say, whether it's somebody who's still in church but they feel like they want to get out, or if it's somebody who's out and they are,
Yeah.
questioning what the next step is. Like, what would you say? Like, just some, I don't know, maybe if you have any
For
advice for people that are on a similar journey as yourself.
Yeah, I mean, for myself, like one of the things that I tell to people is just keep being honest with yourself. So if you're still a Christian, it's all good. You know what I'm saying? I ain't gonna judge you. As long as
Yeah.
you stay true to yourself, then more power to you. But I would encourage everyone to keep doing your homework. Look into the history of Christianity and the Bible and Jesus, the divinity of Jesus. Because a lot of times people just say, "Well, I don't need to look into that stuff because I have a personal relationship with God." And I'm saying, fine, you can say that if you want, but then you can't really criticize another person's religion because they could say the same thing. Like, how do you know your religion's true? Oh, because I feel a bosom, burning in my bosom. So it's like you can't really have dialogue.
The burning.
So I
Yeah.
would just encourage people, do your homework, and if you're the type of person who asks a lot of tough questions in a religious environment, then you got to have some thick skin, because you got to learn how to handle rejection and people labeling you, calling you names, demonizing you or condemning you, and
Hmm.
and you got to realize it's because they don't understand. So a lot of people ask me, if you just go through my YouTube comments, bro, the majority of them, they're negative. A lot of them,
Oh
especially
God.
on my recent videos, it's very negative on my recent videos, and they say, Josh, how do you handle that stuff, man? A lot of people ask me that when they meet me in person, and I just say, it doesn't bother me at all
Yeah.
because I know where they're coming from. I know that they have a worldview that creates this us versus them. We're in, you're out, we're going to heaven, you're going to hell. And so I see where they're coming from. So I don't get bitter. So that's why I encourage people to not let it get to them by just understanding why they're saying what they're saying. It's because they're ignorant in many ways. Not to try to be, yeah, I'm not trying to be mean, but that's just how it
Yeah.
is. And I just want people to see, try to understand them so you don't end up all bitter and pissed off because that's not going to work for you either.
No.
And another thing is that if you are going to go on this journey, if you're in a similar place that I'm in, or you're thinking about leaving the ministry or whatever, you will lose a good number of friendships along the way.
Yeah.
That there's no doubt about that. And the thing is, it's like I've lost a lot of friends, like a lot of people in my life because of my beliefs, my lack of beliefs, and but thankfully I've been able to move on despite
Yeah.
the difficulties at times. And what I've learned is, after all these years, that after wanting to keep certain relationships together, I started to ask myself, why invest so much time and energy in trying to make a relationship stay together if the other person isn't interested anymore because of your changes? Like imagine if someone's only your friend because they want to share the same, because you share the same faith, and they don't appreciate you for just being you.
Yeah.
Then my thing is to those, for those of you who are experiencing that, then why try to keep those relationships together when you can't be yourself around them? To me, I started to see that's silly because when I went back to the States, when I found out a lot of people didn't want to, see me anymore, I was trying to reach out to them, and then I just reached a point where, why am I doing this? Like these people they're either, they get uncomfortable around me, that's for sure, because they would watch my videos and stuff. But,
Yeah.
but then I started to see, okay, if they're not willing to sit down with me and hear my heart and still stay my friends and agree to disagree, then maybe it's not worth trying to keep these friendships together, And so I would just tell people who are in that situation who might be losing friendships because of your journey, you could miss your friends, you could revisit those good memories you have together, but you got to think and move on because people change. We change. We all change, in some ways more than others, but it's not the end of the world, And so there are countless of people out there who are just like you and me, and people who could relate to us in our, quote unquote, spiritual journey, and who are at the same time longing for authentic relationships that aren't based upon certain dogma. And so you lose some and you gain some. So just look
Yeah.
at it as like a new chapter in your life. So it could be kind of exciting in a way, but you just have to get your ass out there. You have to be able to get out of your comfort zone and just talk to people, because a lot of times people only have friends because they were in church together. They were part of
Yeah.
the small group. Learn how to socialize, man. Just get out there and learn how to talk, for goodness sake.
Yeah.
Join
Learn how to
meetups
be.
now.
That's what
Be
I
a
was.
human being.
Yes, exactly. Like learning how to be a human being again is like, it's just so interesting because you get given this like apparatus that kind of like
Right.
does your socializing for you. And it's like, okay, hey, we all believe the same stuff. Therefore, we
Yeah.
all go out for pizza together and do this
Exactly.
and this together. And so it's like, oh, just discovering like who you are and what you're passionate about. Cause like, I don't know, the main thing, like the conformity that like was necessary in so
Right.
many different systems. And it was like even the most freest expressions of church or whatever, I still was like, always felt like, well, even though this is the free expression, it still has to look like this way. Otherwise, you're not allowed. Like, you have to believe the
Right.
same, like, even with grace or with whatever, like the most liberal, progressive stuff, you still have to, like, be like the same. Otherwise, you're not welcome. So I was like, this is just like a
Yeah.
terrible basis for like friendship
Yeah.
and life.
Yeah, and granted, there are some people in the churches who are open to you disagreeing and stuff, but
yeah.
at the same time, some of them will still have that mentality of like thinking, "Oh, you're lost," or we must be able to pray and save you somehow in the end. You know what I'm saying? And so there is that uniformity that goes on, and I don't deny that ideas do connect people together, right?
Yeah.
In some ways, right? Like those of us who have left the institutional church, a lot of people can relate because of that. And so you
Yeah.
start meeting up because, hey, you left too, me too, So I don't deny that ideas
Yeah.
can connect people together. But as long as we don't have this mentality of, we're better than this other group, or we're the ones that are really blessed, because
Yeah.
we're following blah, 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 or then whatever, But my thing is, I'm just telling people, be intentional, make friends. Like if you were to be here in the Philippines with me and my wife and other people can vouch, I'm the type that likes to talk to people when I'm out. Like if I'm in
Yeah.
the elevator, I'll talk to the janitor. Like I just like making people feel loved because they're a human being.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, if we could all just see past the dogma somehow and just look at the person in front of you as a human being who's on this earth too, trying to live this life, just like you, and everyone's wanting to just connect with other people, knowing that, hey, I'm here too. That's why I love saying hi to the guards that are in my building,
Yeah.
where I live in my condo, and just recognizing them as, hey, I see you. It's all good. And it's, because we're all living on this planet together, man. So why
Yeah.
not just like be happy together,
Yeah,
instead of-
exactly. Recognize each other are there rather than like looking away or pretending.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not saying everyone has to talk to everybody, but
Yeah.
at least make an effort. If you're looking for friendships,
Yeah.
right? If you're looking for it, then be intentional and don't expect, I'm just going to pray and just ask God to summon someone. No, just make an effort. But at the same time, another important thing that I could share to people that are on this journey is that cherish those moments of being alone, in the sense of like getting away from all the noise. and not allowing a lot of the people trying to convince you to believe certain things. I did cherish the times when a lot of my friends left and I would just be alone all the time, just taking walks, just thinking about stuff. And I did see that as something as very beneficial for me to like not have all these voices in my head trying to tell me, people in my ear trying to tell me believe this or don't believe that, but just really being alone and just learning to quote unquote find myself and create myself and just choosing the path that made the most sense to me. And that's what I want to tell people. Choose a path that makes the most sense to you, because why try to force yourself to follow something or to believe something that doesn't make sense to you?
Yeah.
It's like, hey, Tony, 2 + 2 is 5. Just believe it, man. Just believe it. It's like beliefs don't work that way.
Yeah.
Right? Beliefs work by either you're persuaded by logic or something, or you have some sort of dramatic experience or whatever that changes your life. So follow what you sense in your heart and in your mind to be true now. You may be right, you may be wrong, but who cares? You at least you're honest with yourself, for goodness sake. And at least you don't have to find your security and find your identity in a particular group or religion or based upon other people's expectations. You know what I'm saying? And so if you could just be true to you, to me, that's a good thing. And so that's what I would leave with a person who is asking for my advice of like what to do on the journey. Just be true to yourself, man. Even if all the people are talking down at you, be true to yourself. You'll be okay.
Dude, I so appreciate that. I honestly think we should end there because it was such a good little last like send off for people. I was like, oh wow, that was great. I was just like closing my eyes. I was like, oh, this is for me too.
It's all good, man. It's for myself too, bro.
You guys check out Joshua's stuff. If you enjoyed this talk, go and get his books. He's got 2 books on Amazon. He's got videos on YouTube at Joshua T77. Find him on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook at Joshua Tongol, joshuatongol.com. I'm sure everything is all laced in together. He's got podcasts out there on iTunes. Pretty much everywhere material can be found, he's got something there for you. So whatever way you like.
The newspaper. I'm just joking. I'm not in the newspaper.
AM radio show at 6 a.m.
No. Cool, man. Appreciate it.
Dude, I so appreciate it. Is there any other places people can find you or any other plugs you have or?
Nothing comes to mind right now. You pretty much said it all.
Cool.
So that's just follow me there.
Thanks for being on the show, man. Make sure to follow Josh on social media and stuff. Keep up with his journey. And I hope you guys were encouraged. Here's another episode of the Tony Sly Show. Thanks so much, Josh.
Thanks, Tony. Have a good one, bro.